All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Menachem Av, the Tilson and Wall families, sending their love from Eretz Yisrael, and in Meretz Hashem inviting us to come and join them. Mishra Tov U'Mitzlachas. Our week of learning sponsors Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of Benjamin Adler Achavar, Baruch Mordechai Ben Moreno Rav Nosson Zichron Livracha, and our Daf Yomi sponsors today, Dan and Adam David Edelman, and their wives sponsor today's daf. L'zecher nishmas, their grandmother Rus Bas Yaakov Zichron Livracha, on the occasion of her 11th yahrzeit, and Lahavdil Ben Chaim L'Chaim in honor of their parents, Dr. and Mrs. Robert and Marjorie Edelman. May their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren continue to bring them nachas and nachas to the Ribono Shalom. What a beautiful, beautiful dedication. All of the neshamas should have an aliyah. The families a nechama, and halavai we shall all be zochem Eretz Hashem to receive beautiful Yiddish nachas for many generations to come. Incredibly beautiful. Well, so with that, let us begin. And of course, we always dedicate our learning in the schus of our precious hostages. May Chadash Baruch Hu bring them home b'shalom and b'karov, and in the schus of our precious soldiers, may Chadash Baruch Hu allow them to be successful b'chol ma'asei yedeihem. Well, so with that, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Samech Gimel 63. We are picking up in Eretz Hashem on Samech Beis and Beis 62b at the two dots. So it is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. So today's topic is pretty much the same thing as yesterday's topic, meaning a discussion about when one goes ahead and sells land using certain verbiage, what is included in the sale, what is not included in the sale. So Gemara says, Amar Rabba, Palga de Isli Ba'ara Palga. So okay, let's give a little bit of context to this case over here. If you take a look at the Rashbam is about 12 lines up from the bottom. Amar Rabba, Ruvain v'Shimon shahir lahem sadeh b'shutfus u'macha Ruvain es chalko le'inish me'alma v'kasav lo kain Palga de Isli Ba'ara klomra chatzi sheyishli b'sadeh zu ani mocha lecha. Okay, so now watch this. Oh, I'm sorry, but I'll hold it. I could keep it closer also. Good, Sammy, thank you. So let's say, now here's the case. Reuven and Shimon, good. Reuven and Shimon are partners in a field. Reuven is selling his portion to, we'll call it Levi. So now Rabbah says something very interesting. If Reuven says, Palga de Isli Ba'ara, the half that I have in this field, so then ultimately, again, Reuven is selling his entire share. He's selling his half. Lashon, Palga de Isli Ba'ara, I'm selling you the half that I have in this field, then ultimately, again, he's selling him the complete half. On the other hand, if he says, Palga ba'ara de isli, half of the land that I have, then ultimately, again, Riva. He's only selling Levi a quarter. He's selling him half of his half. I was about to say, you hear this distinction? If he says, right, if Reuven's selling Reuven owns half of the land together with Shimon. Shimon owns half, Reuven owns half. See if Reuven says, I'm selling you half of the land that I have, Palga de Isli, half of the land, half of what I have in the land, then ultimately again he's selling him his entire portion, i.e. half of the land. If he says Palga ba'ar de Isli, half of the land that I have, then ultimately again he's selling him half of his portion, which is a quarter of his land. Okay, I'm with Abaye. So Abaye says, come on, mashnahachi. Kind of sounds like he's saying the same thing in both of those statements, to which the Gemara says, ishtik. Rabba was silent. So the Gemara said, I'm not Abaye. Abaye said, anasavri midi ishtik kabuli kabli. Abaye said, I assumed that since Rabba was quiet when I said this, that he accepted my opinion. He accepted the retort. So the Gemara says, Velohi. In fact, that's not the case. Rabba will say, interestingly enough, sometimes silence can be acquiescence, and sometimes silence is just like, I don't feel like engaging. I'm not. So apparently, Abaye thought Rabba's silence was that Rabba agreed with Abaye. It turns out that Rabba's silence was just that Rabba didn't feel the need to engage on this with Abaye. The Gemara says, Velohi. So the Gemara says, Velohi, Chazinahu shtar denafik mi beimar, because I saw certain shtaras that came out of Rabba's home, uksiv behu haki, and it said as follows. Palga de Isli Ba'ara Palga. That if Reuven says, again, if the seller who owns 50% is a partner, right? Reuven is a partner with Shimon. And so Reuven says, Palga de Isli Ba'ara, half of what I have in this land. Then it turns out that Reuven is selling his entire portion of the partnership property. Palga ba'ara de isli. But if on the other hand he says half of the land that I have, Revia. Ultimately, again, he's only selling a quarter. So Rabbi says, so halacha l'maisa, we see that in fact Rabbi sticks to his distinction, and ultimately, again, just a slight change of the words significantly changes the impact of the sale. Fascinating. Rabbi says as follows. So Rabbi says some more of these examples of how just I am saying. What I want to point out is, understand, this is one of these situations where the Hebrew, or in this case the Aramaic, right, the English doesn't translate as well, right? Because again, in English, these phrases sound so similar that it's hard to pick up the nuance. But if you look at the lashon of the Gemara, palga de isli ba'ara, the half that I have in the land versus half of the land that I have. So the half that I have in the land is Reuven selling his entire portion. Half of the land that I have is Reuven selling half of his portion, i.e. a quarter. So the nuance is nuanced, right? So you understand, good. So the Gemara says, another example of this, Meitzer ara dimina palga. All right, so we'll say, let's give a little bit of more context with this as well. Take a look at the Rashbam. This Rashbam is 4 lines up from the bottom. Meitzer ara dimina palga, Reuven shayalo sada, umachar miktsas l'shimon samar. So here's the case. Reuven has a field. Now, in this case, Reuven is only selling part of his field to Shimon. Right, so machar miktsas l'shimon l'tzad marav on the western side, or mitzad mizrach. So Reuven has a field. He's selling the western side of the field to Shimon, right? Or mitzad mizrach ikev la'atzmo. But on the eastern side, Reuven is holding back something for himself. So there's one field, Reuven's selling it. He's selling part of it on the western side to Shimon, and he's holding a piece of it on the eastern side to himself. What's the problem? V'lo pirish kama machar v'kama shir. The problem is he's not explicit with how much he's selling and how much he's withholding. Elakach kasav. Rather, what does he do? Elakach kasav hamitzarim. Rather, so what does he do? He ends up going ahead and writing the borders. Sada ploni shani mocha leploni mitzad marav levi umitzad mizrach ara dimina. Palga hakarka atzmos. We'll say, so what he ends up doing is as follows. So the issue in this case, so okay, let's frame it now. Reuven is selling a field to Shimon, but Reuven is not selling the whole field. Instead, what Reuven is doing is he's going ahead and he's selling part of the western side to Shimon, and he's retaining part of the eastern side for himself. One little detail, he doesn't articulate how much he is retaining for himself. So the Gemara says like this. So now back to the Gemara. If Reuven says the following, Meitzer ara dimina palga. So literally translated, I'm retaining a border of the field, part of the border of the field, palga, part, a half, right? So literally again, I'm retaining half of the border of the field, then palga. Then what that means is he's selling half of the field. He's selling half of the field, he's retaining half of the field. Meitzer ara dimina psika. If he says, however, again, on the border of the field, I'm cutting off a piece for myself. See the distinction over here? The distinction is in the word palga, half, versus psika, taking off a piece. So then in that case, tes kabin. He's only retaining for himself enough land to plant 9 kav of seed. Okay, so an interesting distinction. If he says, essentially, if he uses the word palga, half, that means he's selling half, retaining half. If he uses lashon of psika, a piece that I'm taking off, then ultimately he's only retaining for himself a piece of land in which you could plant 9 kav of seed. Amarle Abaye mashnachi. So Abaye, see, it's interesting what I was saying. So Rabba seems to really be very tuned in to the nuance over here. Abaye seems to have a little bit more of a difficult time really appreciating the differentiation and the nuance. So Abaye says, come on, it sounds like the same thing. Mashnachi, ishtik. Once again, Rabba was quiet. He didn't respond. Savramine, so idi palga. So once again, Abaye, so we'll say, by the way, it's also interesting over here. The same Abaye, who apparently doesn't really share the appreciation for nuance, also is not really able to pick up on the true nature of the silence, right? It's interesting. It's also there are some people who are like kind of like bigger picture thinkers, and some people who are like smaller detail thinkers. You have people who are both, but often you see that distinction. So it's almost as if over here that the Rabbi personality is able to kind of splice the nuances. The Abaye personality is kind of the bigger picture thinker. So the Abaye personality doesn't really see the distinction in the wording that Rabbi is pointing out over here. Furthermore, again, he understands Rabbi's silence as acquiescence, but in fact it's not true. So the Gemara says, top of Samach Gimel 63, Velohi. That's not true. That's not the way it works. The Amar of Yemar Bar Shamya Lididi Mefarshli Min Eida Abaye Bein Meitzer Ara Demina Palga Ubein Meitzer Ara Demina Psika. So listen to this. So Rav Yemar Bar Shamya understands something a little bit differently. He says, I heard, based on the position of Abaye, Bein Meitzer Ara Demina Palga, whether Ruvain said, I am retaining half of the area of the border, or whether he said, Ubein Meitzer Ara Demina Psika, or I am literally again keeping a piece of the border area. I amrle alin mitzarna palga. I amrle alin mitzarna palga. Lo amrle alin mitzarna. Lo amrle alin mitzarna tisha kabin. So Rabbi says it's interesting. So Rav Yerav Shamya seems to understand over here that it's fundamentally dependent on whether or not use the lashon of Alin Mitzarna. These are the borders. If he said these are the borders, then he's retaining half for himself. If he did not say Alin Mitzarna, these are the borders, then he's only retaining Tisha Kabin, a little slice of land for himself. So we'll say, like when we started this sugya, so much of this is based on Minagamakam. Right? So again, this really is not like in-depth analytics. This is about how people spoke, and ultimately, again, what certain statements meant and how certain statements reflected on the real estate transaction. Okay, beautiful. Let's go right there. So Pshita, Amar Yachloku, Ploni B'nichse, Palga. So I'll say now, an interesting case over here. So first, I'll take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam is right across on the right side. Pshita, Shchid Mira, Ploni Yachloku B'nichse Ploni. So also listen to this. So Ruvain goes ahead and says, Shimon, Yachlok Ploni B'nechasai. So Ruvain says, Shimon should literally again divide my assets. Right? So what does that mean? Pelga. Ruvain is gifting away half of his estate. Now, by the way, the Rashbam says this could be a shchivmira, someone on his deathbed, but it doesn't have to be a shchivmira. So the idea is, if you use lashon of yachlok ploni b'nechasai, so ploni should take half of my possessions, then obviously Reuven is giving away half of his possessions. Tenu chelek leploni b'nechasai mai. What happens if Reuven says, give Shimon a chelek? So we'll say, you hear the difference between yachlok and chelek? Yachlok means divide. The Pashat definition of divide is half. Versus give a chelek to Ploni of my property. What does chelek mean? Some Ravina Bar Kisi, so Ravina Bar Kisi said as follows, Tashma, the Sanya, Homer Tnu Chelek Ploni Bebar. So let's listen to this. What happens if I have a pit of water? A well, and I say, give Ploni a chelek in the bar. Give him a chelek in the bar. So what does that mean? So Sumchas Omer in Pachos Miravia. So Sumchas says it's a quarter of the water in the bar. Okay, so I'll say, interestingly enough, it's not as much ownership of the bar as much as it is water rights. So give him a quarter of the water in the bar. L'chavis. If I say, same case, I have the well, and I say, in case number one, I said, Tnu chelek l'ploni, right? Give a portion to Ploni. In case number two, l'chavis, I'm saying literally again, give enough for Ruvain's barrel. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? So again, if you take a look at the Rashbam is in the widest lines now, about 6 lines in Lechavis, in Pachos Rishona, Kolomar, Imam Tnu Chelek Ploni Bebar Lechavis, Kadei Lamalos Chavis, Dainu Lahashkos Behemosav. See, interestingly enough, so Allah, if you use the lashon of, if I say give Ruvain enough water for his barrel. Barrel was the word that was used to feed animals, to water animals. So really, what I'm saying is, give Ruvain enough water from this well to give to his animals. So how much is that? In pachos mishminis. That's 1/8 of the water of the well. Okay, likdera. If I go ahead and I say, give Ruvain enough water from this well, likdera. Likdera means for cooking purposes. For cooking purposes, how much does he get? Ein pachos miyud beis. He gets 1/12. 1/12 of the water in the well. Okay, litafiach. What happens if I say litafiach? Now, litafiach literally means for drinking. For drinking. The Rashbam says over here, Kli katan lishtos bo b'nei adam v'hayshir zuta mikulu. If I say just have a little bit of drinking, right, litafiach for drinking, ein pachos mishisha. So he gets 1/16 of the water. Now, okay, so what does this have to do with anything? Look at that Rashbam, the Tafiach. So continue in that. So we'll say that Rashbam is about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines down from in the wide line. Look at the Rashbam. So we'll say, so remember again, how do we get into this? So remember again, I'm gifting away my property. Right? So remember again, there are 2 ways to say it. If I say, Yachlok Ploni benachasai, Ploni, right? Ploni should divide. So then what does that mean? I'm giving away 50% of my assets. If on the other hand I say, Tnu Chelek leploni, what does Chelek mean? What does chelek mean? So now the Gemara goes ahead and brings down this whole case of I'm giving away water in my well, and depending on what I say, gives. So now look what the Rashbam says. V'hilchach kabetnu chelek l'ploni b'nechasai yitol revia. So if I will say, this is very interesting. Therefore, if I use the lashon of give a chelek of my property to Ploni, really what I'm doing is I'm gifting 1/4 of my assets. 1/4 of my assets. Now, where do we get that from? So we'll say, here's the issue. The Dilma Palga Kamar or Dilma Shavar Pruta Kamar. So we'll say, here's the issue. Tenu Chelek Leploni could mean one of 2 things. What could it? Well, let's plot the range. What's the range? What could it mean? What could it mean? What could it mean? The most, what could it mean? Half. The least, what could it mean? A pruta. A pruta, right? The pruta is also a Chelek. So I don't know, right? It's a pretty big range. So what am I giving Ruvain? Am I giving him 1/4, right? Am I giving him a pruta, or am I giving him half of my assets? So the Gemara says, therefore what? So the Dilma Palga Kamar, or Dilma Shava Pruta Kamar, Umawan Amutal Basafek, Cholkin. So we'll say, so therefore again, in general, whenever you have, this is Sumchos, right? This is back to Sumchos. Maman Amutal Basafek, whenever you have a doubt in money, split the doubt down the middle. So whatever, you'll split that amount between whatever is a pruta and whatever is a half, and that's ultimately again what you'll give Reuven in this case. We'll say, by the way, it's such a tremendous Mosar Haskell on this also, that whenever you speak in non-explicit terms, you leave yourself open to such exposure. In other words, sometimes we're afraid to say, there are different kinds of people. Some people are never afraid to say what's on their mind. Bad midah. Bad midah. A person has to know how to talk and when to hold their tongue and know how to frame certain things in certain ways, because otherwise you just have difficulty really sustaining good relationships because you just become an abrasive and obnoxious individual. On the other hand, some people just are always like too timid to say what it is that they mean, in which case no one really ever has clarity as to what they're talking about, or what they stand for, or what they believe in, or what they're... So there's this like fine line between, on one hand, kind of knowing when to couch your words, and when to be a little bit softer, when to leave a little bit of nuance, but on the other hand, if you leave too much nuance all the time, no one knows what it is that you're talking about. And then there are times that you have to be explicit. So it's incredible over here. So this guy, because he was not specific, right? Tnu chelik laploni. Right? That doesn't mean a pruta, doesn't mean half. We don't know. And because he's so ambiguous, there's this incredible range. Okay, let's go back there. Says the Gemara. Tanrabanan. Ben Levi, interesting case here. Ben Levi shemachar sadeh Yisrael. So watch this. A Levi is selling his field to Yisrael. That was saying, I remember again, as a Levi, one is entitled to Meiser Rishon. Right, remember again, Kohen gets Truma, Levi gets Meiser Rishon. So now watch this case. A Levi has a field. A Levi owns a field. Now the Levi is selling his field to Yisrael. Va'omer lo, and he says, right, the Levi says to the Yisrael, Almanas shemeiser Rishon sheli. Right, so what happens? So Levi says, I'm selling you the field, but on the condition that I retain the Meiser Rishon. This is a good chap, by the way, right? So what's happening over here? So in other words, Levi is selling to Yisrael. So Levi's selling the field, but Levi says, listen, I'm selling you the field, but you're going to grow produce on the field. I'm selling you on the condition that you give me your Meiser Rishon. Okay, now by the way, for the Yisrael, there's no loss. Because he has to give away the Meiser Rishon. Anyway, now again, it could very well be that if you're a Yisrael, you might have relatives who are Leviim, right? So you'd rather give it to them than to give it to Levi, than to give it to this guy over here. But okay, that's more like a Tovas Hana type of thing. But Lamaisa, so again, from the Yisrael perspective, I'm not losing it. It's the same Meiser Rishon. I have to give it away. But now the Levi is stipulating in the sale, I'm selling you the field on the condition that you give me the right Meiser Rishon. So the Gemara says, what's the halacha Meiser Rishon shelo? It works. It is a binding stipulation. So now what? And now, okay. So now Levi's getting, I don't want to call it a little greedy, but all right, we'll call it ambitious. There's a fine line between ambition and greed, right? So a little ambitious. So Levi says, I'm selling you this field on the condition that you give me the Meiser Rishon and you give it to my kids after me. So what's the halacha? Meis yitin lebanavs. Okay, it works. In other words, so once the Levi dies, I, the Yisrael, am obligated to continue to go ahead and give the Meiser Rishon to his kids. Now listen to this. Now watch this. If Levi says, so Levi's selling me the field, so Levi says, listen, as long as the field is in your possession, you have to give me the Meiser Rishon. And I say, no problem. Then what do I do? Machra v'chazra v'lakcha. So I say, you know what I do? I buy the field from the Levi. Then I go ahead and go and sell it to Ruvain. And then I buy it back from Ruvain. Ein lo alav klum. In that case, Levi has no more claim against me because, again, he stipulated as long as I own the field, I have an obligation to give him the Meiser Rishon. Well, I owned the field. Now I sold it to Ruvain. I bought it back an hour later from Ruvain. So again, the stipulation is null and void. Okay, so both sides. So now, let's go back to the original case, right? Original case is Levi is selling me a field. He says this sale is predicated on the idea that I continue to receive the Meiser Rishon. The Gemara says, stipulation works. The Gemara says, Amai. Ein adam makne davar shelo bali olam. So I'll say, so I don't understand, how does this work? In general, you can't convey ownership of something that does not yet exist. So at this point, when Levi is selling me the field, the assumption is there is no Meiser Rishon. So how can we go ahead and make a binding transaction upon something that does not yet exist? There's this general idea. You can't convey ownership over something that doesn't exist. So the Gemara says, no. Kevan da amarle almanas shemeiser rishon sheli sheyure share lemakom meiser. Wow. The Gemara says, no. You understand what's happening over here? You're right. In general, you can't transact business with something that doesn't yet exist. Right? So what's happening over here? When Levi says essentially, I'm selling you the field on the condition that I still receive the Meiser Rishon, what he's essentially doing is withholding part of the land itself for himself. So essentially what he's really saying is, the area of the land upon which the Meiser Rishon grows is mine. See, he's retaining real estate. So that's very different about say. See, we thought originally what he's doing is, he is retaining a right. The problem is, I don't have the ability to transact with him regarding that right because the Meiser Rishon doesn't exist. So Shmuel says, no, we're not doing something that doesn't exist, we're dealing with land. The land does exist. Essentially, what Levi is doing is, by claiming the continued right to the Meiser Rishon, he's claiming a continued right to some area of the real estate. So essentially what he's saying is, I hereby retain the right to the area upon which the Meiser Rishon is growing. So the land is mine, and therefore again the Meiser Rishon that grows on there is going to be mine as well. Fascinating. Look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, so Kevan the Amrle Almanas, it's about 10 lines off on the bottom. Kilomar Kevan the Almanas, the Al Tanai Machar, Rotsu Shi Skaima Tanai, the Ina Damasna, Al Chinam, Uladas Kain Machar, Shiyikna Mais, Vilchach Shir Biado Karka, Haroi Ligadal Baha Meiser, Kamish Amrlo, Sade Sheli Animocha Lechalvisa. So I'll say, now watch what's happening over here. This is actually quite fascinating. So just let's play this out. Levi is selling me the field, right? So Levi says, I'm selling you Silber the field on the condition that I continue to receive the Meiser Rishon. I say, sure. So all sounds great. The problem is we cannot create a binding condition based on something that doesn't exist. The Meiser Rishon doesn't exist. Gemara says, you're right. So what's happening over here? What's happening over here is Levi's really retaining land. That's why he's really retaining land, and therefore, essentially, he gets the rights to the property by dint of the land, the right to the produce of the Meiser Rishon, by dint of the land that he still owns. The Rashbam says over here, essentially, what it does is it almost creates like a sharecropping arrangement. That's almost what it does. Now, I will say, now for our purposes, what this tells me is as follows: when a person makes a tanai in a transaction, a person never makes a tanai for the purpose of the tanai being null and void. As if I'm making a tanai, if I'm making a condition, I want the condition to be proper, which means that if the condition as it is articulated is void, the halacha by definition reinterprets it in a way that makes it valid. So in other words, the condition to say, when a Levi says, I'm selling you this property on the condition that I retain the Meiser Rishon, that statement doesn't make sense because you can't make it tonight with something that doesn't exist. So what does the halacha do? People don't mean for their words to be nonsensical or void. So instead what the halacha does is the halacha reinterprets that statement in a different way. It's fascinating, right? The halacha interprets a statement in a way that makes sense. How does a statement make sense? I, Levi, am retaining a certain amount of land. And by dint of that land, now I have the continued right to the Meiser Rishon. So we'll say, so therefore, when you make a statement, and the statement itself does not work, the statement itself would normally be void, the halacha reinterprets it in a way that can be void, that can be valid. Incredible. So Reish Lakish says, Zosomeres, this tells me, Hamocher Bais Lechavero. If a person sells a house to his friend, va'amrlo almanas shediyuta ha'alyona shali. Now watch this. I sell a property to Ruvain, and I say, Ruvain, I'm selling you this property on the condition that the upper story is mine. The diyuta is mine. Okay, now take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, Braisa Zudia Shmainim the Chol Tanai She'eno Lo Maila Velo Morid El Imkin Shir Aminan Shir Shir Makom Latzmo Porta Mina Shaminan Damocher Bais Chaver Va'amlamana Shedyuta Al Yona Shali Hadyuta Al Shalo. So who gag Shish Lamakek Gavoyud. Now we'll say, now a diyuta is a rooftop. It's not to say it's a rooftop that has a fence that is at least 10 tvachim high. 10 tvachim high. Now I say, so now watch this. So therefore, if I make a statement, I sell a house to Ruvain, and I say, Ruvain, I'm selling you this house on the condition that the rooftop remains mine. So what's talacha? Diyuta ha'alyona shalo. So the rooftop is mine. That's talacha. Okay. Sounds pretty straightforward. And we'll say, what's the problem? Now I'm just going to, you understand, let's anticipate what the problem is. What's the problem? We'll say, we learned in the Mishnah, when you sell a house, what's excluded from the house? What's excluded from the sale of the home? A rooftop that has a mechitza that's 10 tefachim or more, because that is considered to be its own separate rishus. Now watch this. So now let's play this out. I'm selling my house to Reuven. I say, Reuven, I'm selling you the house on the condition that what? That the rooftop is mine. So I'll say, so the problem is that statement is an irrelevant statement because the rooftop is already mine, because a rooftop with a fence that is 10 tefachim high is excluded from the sale of a home. Now, what did we just say? What principle did we just establish? We just established that when you go ahead and you make a tanai in a transaction, a person never means for their tanai to be void. Right, to be null and void. So rather, what does the halacha do? The halacha has to reinterpret your statement in a way that makes sense, right? Levi says to me, Silber, I'm selling you my field on the condition that I retain my Meiser Rishon. Well, you can't do that. That doesn't make any sense because it's the davar shalom. It doesn't exist. So what does the halacha do? Levi's really retaining some portion of land. Okay, so now I'm selling my house to Reuven. I say, Reuven, I'm selling you my house, but I'm keeping the rooftop. But the rooftop is already mine. It's already mine. So the Gemara says, so what does this mean? So now, if we accept the premise that a person never makes a Tanai for no reason, and therefore again, even when the Tanai sounds null and void, the halacha will reinterpret it in a way that makes sense. So what do we do in this case over here? Right? So how do we interpret this? So again, I'm selling my house to Reuven. Reuven, I'm selling you my house, but I'm keeping my rooftop. Shkoyach, you already own your rooftop. Rooftop is already yours. It's already excluded from the sale. So how will the halacha reinterpret my statement over here? Rav Zvid Amar Shemratza lahotzi bazizin motzi. Interesting. So we'll say, so now in this case, if you imagine for a moment, I am selling to Reuven both my home and the surrounding chatzar. Right, so that's a home and a chatzar. I'm selling him a property, home and a chatzar. So now I obviously retain the rooftop. Now, in my statement of the sale, I said, Reuven, I'm selling you the home, but I'm keeping the rooftop for myself. Now I will say, now that statement by itself is null and void because I already retained the rooftop even without the statement. So now the halacha has to reinterpret the statement to mean something else. So what does it mean? So Rav Zvid will say what it means is that I retain the right to have beams extend from my roof into the chatzar. Now we learned about this before, so what did the Mishnah say? Normally, you can't extend your beams into someone else's chatzar. Oh, but this statement means that I'm selling you my rooftop, I'm selling you my house with the condition that I retain the rooftop, and retention of the rooftop means that if I want to extend beams from the rooftop into the chatzar, I have the ability to do so. Rav Papa says, Shem rotza livnos aliyah al gaba bona. Rav Papa says what it means is like this. If the roof collapses, I retain the right to rebuild the roof. I was supposed to say normally, under normal circumstances, if I sell a home, right, and let's say the rooftop is a rooftop that has a mechitza more than 10 tefachim, so I retain that for myself. I only retain it as long as that roof exists. If the roof collapses and now Reuven has to rebuild his roof, that's no longer mine. So Rav Papa says, in this case over here, where I single out, I explicitly say that I'm selling you my house, but I'm retaining the roof. What that means is, what am I retaining? I'm retaining the right to rebuild the roof should it collapse. So Bishol the Rav Zvid. So according to Rav Zvid, it makes sense. Hainu diktani zos omeres. So that's why the lashon of the Gemara ultimately again is zos omeres, right? Because ultimately it's espousing the principle. El Rav Papa my zos omeres. According to Rav Papa, who says it's the right to rebuild, what does it mean zos omeres? Gemara says kasha. Okay, so we'll say. So interestingly enough, so there's a machlok. So the Gemara ends off with the kasha Rav Papa's interpretation. But I will say, but this really highlights a fascinating dynamic, right? That the Gemara is highlighting this concept that first of all, ein adam motzi dvarav levatala. So I'll say this is a pretty profound idea. People don't say nonsensical or meaningless words. If only, right? If only. So I'll say. So again, let's reinterpret this. Transactionally, people don't say meaningless words, right? In life, people say meaningless words, unfortunately, all of the time. Transactionally, the Gemara assumes over here that if you're entering into a business transaction, you're measuring your words. And the words that you say, you mean specifically to convey a certain meaning. So what's fascinating about this dynamic over here is therefore the Gemara says, if you're selling something and you make a Tanai in your sale, but the way you articulated the Tanai doesn't make any sense. The Gemara says, clearly you mean the Tanai to be a binding reality in the sale. So if the way you articulated it doesn't make sense, the halacha will essentially reinterpret it for you. So therefore, again, if you're the Levi selling property and you are retaining the rights to your Meiser Rishon, but that doesn't make any sense because it's a davar shalom, it doesn't exist. We interpret that to mean, Levi, you are retaining some amount of real property for yourself in this sale. Right? Similarly, you sell a house and you explicitly say, but I'm holding on to the roof. I'm not selling the roof, but it's a roof with a fence of 10 tefachim, which is already yours. It means you're retaining some other right. Whether it's to go ahead and extend beams into the courtyard or it's to rebuild it. So I will say, but again, the Gemara is understanding transactionally, a person never says something nonsensical, and therefore even if it sounds nonsensical or void, we will reinterpret your words to be transactionally significant. Fascinating. The Gemara goes weiter. Rav Dimi ben Arda. Hayman demas ben lebeis lechavre. Supposed to listen to the interesting case over here. So Rav Dimi says the name of Rav. So sorry. Rav Dimi ben Arda says as follows. Hayman demas ben lebeis lechavre. I'm selling my house to my friend. Afagav the kasav le umka veruma. So I'll say, now listen to this. In the shtar, I said, Ruvain, I'm selling you my house. I'm selling you my house from the heights to the depths. Umka, rumka, a little depths to the heights. Okay. Then what's the halacha? Afagav the kasav le umka veruma. Sarich lemichtav le kani le mitahom ara va'ad rom rakia. So I'll say, listen to this. Even though, right, so I'm selling Ruvain my house, even though I use the lashon of Ruvain, I'm selling you my house from Umka to Ruma, from the depths to the heights. It's not meaningful unless, of course, I write from Tahom Ara ad Rom Rakia, from the depths of the earth until the heights of the heavens. Okay, the Gemara says, my time, what? I don't know, kind of sounds the same to me. What's going on over here? So listen to this. My time, du'umka veruma bistama lokani. So we'll say it must be that again, in general, when you go ahead and you make a statement, ultimately again of umka and ruma, right, heights and depths, that's not really meaningful. Not really meaningful. Now, I was saying, take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. What is it exactly that's happening over here? So in the wide lines of the Rashbam, this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines in. Hayman demaz bin lei. Okay, so now included in the sale, I want to sell my wells and my water cistern. So I want to sell those things that are dug into the ground itself. So the shaila is, what type of verbiage do I need to use in order to ensure that my well and my water cisterns are included in the sale? That's the shaila. That's what's happening over here. So what the Gemara wants to make is the following suggestion, or I should say what Rav Dimi ben Arda makes the following suggestion. If you just say me umka veruma, from the depths to the heights, so I'll say really what that refers to is the area underneath the house itself, right? And the airspace of the house above it. It doesn't say anything about wells or water cisterns. If you want to include wells or water cisterns in the sale, you need to use the lashon of umka da'ara. Well, what's the lashon of what's the Gemara? Tahom ara rom rakia. The depths, to home, literally again means like the abyss, right? Deeper down than umka. Tahom ara ad rom rakia. So again, just interestingly enough, even though for us, like English-wise, like they both translate from depths, right, until the heights, but you can see the nuance in the Hebrew and the Aramaic, right? So umka means deep, Roma means height, umka to home, right? Or I keep on, right? To home ara, as Rom rakia. So to home ara is even like a deeper lashon, right? The to home literally means the bottom depths. Rom rakia, the heights of the heavens. Okay. And that ultimately, again, the Gemara says, Ahani umka says, let's go back. So my time, what's the reason? To umka v'roma b'stama lokani. Because we'll say the lashon of umka and roma by themselves will not give you rights over the bar and the dus. Will not give you rights over the well and the water cistern. So now watch this. Ahani umka v'ruma lemikni umka v'ruma. So we'll say umka v'ruma. So what does umka v'ruma do? Umka v'ruma gives you the actual depths and heights under the house. See, I will say, now watch this. Here's what's interesting. The Havmini of the Gemara is, let's say I sell Ruvain a house. I just sell him a bayis stam. So maybe I retain the rights to dig underneath the house. I don't know. I want to put a subterranean basement, underneath the house. I have the ability to do so. So the Gemara suggests like this. When I sell Reuven a house, umka v'ruma means he owns the land underneath the house and the airspace above the house. That's what umka v'ruma does. But what umka v'ruma doesn't do is umka v'ruma does not give him the well. Does not give him the well, the bar, and the dus, the water cistern. V'ahani mitahom ara v'adrom rakia lemikne bar v'dus umechilos. But ultimately, then when I use lashon of tahom ara adrom rakia, that additional lashon gives him what? Gives Ruvain wells and water cisterns. Wells, water cisterns, tunnels, any subterranean structures ultimately again now go to Ruvain. So we'll see here it. So now what the Gemara is suggesting is Tahom Ara Rom Rakia gives him area beneath the house and above the house, but does not give him any other subterranean structures. But however, again, Tahom Ara, Rom Rakia, that gives him even subterranean structures. Let me see, let's bring us proof to this. Veloas Habar, Veloas Hados. So as halacha, normally Rabbi say, if you sell someone a home, so what's not included in the home is the bar and the dos. Afapi shekasav lo umka veruma. Even though you write in the sale umka varuma. So you see over here that umka varuma really gives you the area beneath the house and above the house, but doesn't give you the bar and the dos. If you automatically assume that in any real estate transaction when you sell someone a house, they automatically acquire the area beneath the house and the area above the house, then when I say umka varuma, lehani umka varuma lemikne bar v'dos mechilos. Then I will say, if it's automatically understood that when you sell a home, right, included in the sale of the home is umka varuma, then again you don't have to say it. And therefore, when you do say it, ultimately again umka varuma should work to acquire the bar and the dos. Should work to acquire everything else, umechilos. To which the Gemara says, the lo kasavli. None of the cases where you didn't write umkavaruma. But that's not what the Brisa said. It said, so Mishnah said, he said, even though you wrote it, umkavaruma. Hakikar, that's what it means to say. Afapi shelo kasav lo kimi shekasav dami lemikne umkavaruma. So listen to this, what I'll say. In general, when you sell a house, even if you don't write varuma, it's as if you wrote varuma. Right? It's understood. Which means it's understood that when I sell a house, I'm selling to Ruvain in the area underneath the house and above the house. Lemikne bar v'dus mechilos. But what if I want to convey to Ruvain the bar dus mechilos, right? The well, the water cistern, the tunnels. If I write varuma, then he'll acquire it. The low cost of law, low kani. But ultimately, if I don't write it, he's not going to acquire it. So we'll say, interestingly enough, what the Gemara is suggesting over here, a little bit of an about face. What the Gemara is suggesting is like this. In general, when you sell a house, so sale of a house is automatically understood to include varuma. It's understood, right? I'm selling the area underneath the house, I'm selling the area above the house. That is understood. It need not be said. Now we'll say, so what happens if you say it? So now what happens if I say, again, it's all part of the same lashon. Transactionally, a person never says anything irrelevant. So if I'm saying something, I mean it to be meaningful. So normally when I sell a house, it's understood I'm selling the house, including varuma. I don't have to say it. So what happens if I say it? What happens if I say, Reuven, I'm selling you my house, and I'm in a good mood, so I'm including varuma. The Gemara says, what that means is bar vidus. That must be coming to include the well and the water cisterns, right? Because again, otherwise the statement itself is meaningless. The fact that I'm including it means I must be including something additional transactionally. What's the additional items being included transactionally? Bar vidus. All right, we'll stop over here for today. Again, we're not finished with this, but again, all part of the same motif, that when a person says something in the context of a transaction, they never mean their words to be null and void, and even if at first glance it appears redundant, we reinterpret it in a way to make it meaningful. Shkach, I will say. All right, have a great day, everyone.